Call this to order. We'll stand up and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Sounds like it's getting a little stormy outside, and maybe we'll all catch some baseball after this. But please remember as we go through our agenda tonight that we always keep our vision of inspiring all learners to be engaged and successful in mind, and then also our mission of providing an enriching environment to meet the needs of all learners. So please keep those in mind as we go through our agenda. Tonight we start with a public hearing for the Fieldhouse project, so it's 7:01, and we'll start this public hearing.
The public hearing is on the proposed issuance of approximately $20 million of school infrastructure sales, services, and use tax revenue and refunding bonds. So that's a legal requirement to have a public hearing when you use sales tax dollars for the building of a facility. So that's what the public hearing is for.
Okay. We do have a public hearing open. Is there anyone that would like to speak towards this that would be here? All right, seeing none, then we will close this public hearing and we'll call it 7:02. We'll go then to, we'll call this meeting to order. We do have enough for a quorum tonight. We need a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Thanks, Jay. Do we have a second?
Second the motion.
Thanks, Tom. We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda approved. Hearing of delegations, I don't see any. Communications to the board. Tonight we have Matt Gillespie with us.
Yeah, we have Matt Gillespie from Piper Sandler here with us tonight. You can see Matt on the screen. He's going to zoom in and talk to us and walk us through the use of the saved dollars to fund the Fieldhouse project. He'll talk a little bit about the possible refinancing of some current debt with this project and show how this is an affordable project for the district to embrace. We're passing out some paper copies. I think Matt might also use those in his screen share tonight. So we'll explain those as we get to them. As we said in our public hearing, we did the public hearing, and the resolution that we previously passed is for approximately $20 million of school infrastructure sales. The project is not that big, but that would include some possible existing debt, which Matt will explain as he starts. So Matt, I know you can just see me right now, but we have our board with us and some people in the audience, and they can all see what you have on the screen.
All right. Well, good evening, board, and thanks for having me, and thanks for allowing me to participate via Zoom. I'm going to go over a few different worksheets here. They're not necessarily going to go in maybe the order that you might choose, but I'm going to explain them, and then since I can't see all of you, I'll stop every so often and just ask if you guys have any questions. But on this first worksheet, this is one...
the second in your packet. Yep.
Yep. So this worksheet I just included because, as Joe said, part of the new bond issuance, presuming that the board moves forward with it, would be, technically it's refinancing the old bond, but it's not refinancing it to save money, unfortunately, like what you would think of when you refinance, your mortgage or something like that. And in fact, actually, the district has refinanced debt before and saved money doing that. So the board has taken that kind of action before. But in this case, the reason that it would need to be refinanced and it really would be restructuring it is because the coverage, what we call the debt service coverage, would not allow you to borrow as much money if you don't restructure that existing debt. And this worksheet that you see up here is just intended to kind of help explain why is that. So here, what I did was I left the existing payments in here. That's what you see here in this fourth from the right column. So if you don't do anything else, you don't move forward with the project, you don't borrow more money, you just keep on living life, you have currently about $1 million payments every year, the existing sales tax bonds that you already have. And that's what you see right here. But if you were to go out and borrow more money, or at least if you needed or wanted to borrow the most you could borrow, The most you can borrow is not necessarily dollar for dollar how much you could repay. Most banks would not lend you to that level. They're going to lend you to some level that is close to what we would call 1.2 times coverage. Or that means that you have $1.20 coming in from the sales tax revenue for every $1 that you owe to make a payment on the debt. So what you see right here is the existing debt remaining outstanding, and then you would have no principal at all being repaid on the new borrowing, because the interest alone, which you see during this period when that existing debt is outstanding, would be roughly $450,000. So when we add the $450,000, or in this case the $446,400, to that $1,034,000 payment, that means you would have total payments of around $1.4 million. And when we compare that to your anticipated sales tax revenue of about $1.7 million, that takes us to that 1.2 calculation. So in other words, with 1.7 million, you have $1.20 for every dollar that you owe to make this $1.48 million payment. Now, this would be perfectly fine if only generating roughly $10 million is enough. And if that ends up being enough, then you don't have to take out that existing debt. But the reason that you can't add more principal in these years, even though down here, but beyond the period of time when that existing debt is outstanding, you can see you have a very high coverage, 1.7. So you definitely have the capacity to add more debt out in these years, but you don't have the capacity to add more payment in the first 6 or 7 years when that existing debt is there. Because again, the interest alone, when added to that existing payment, is taking you down to that 1.2 number, and you can't go below the 1.2 in any 1 year. So even if it was only 1 year, that would also be, keeping you from doing anything more. So if you did this, what you can see is I left the project funds in here, just assuming that it was 10.5 million, and we'll talk more about that in a second. This is just showing that you'd actually be about almost $1.9 million short in this scenario. So it's not that you want to restructure that existing debt, because it is at lower interest rates. It's that you have to restructure that debt if you want to generate the larger amount of money, this roughly $10.5-ish million amount. So before we go to the next page, which is the real scenario, at least what I believe to be the real scenario, are there any questions from the board about why this is like this and why you're having to issue this extra amount to take out the old bonds?
I think we can go to the next page, Matt.
All right. I guess that means everybody can explain that. That's good. So this then is basically the same thing, except now you are taking out that existing debt. So you can see that in this fourth from the right column, there are no payments because those old payments go away because you'd be taking money from the new bond and paying off the old bond. And that's what you see up here, calling the prior sales tax bonds of $6.9 million. And this is what we think is the real scenario. This is what we think you're actually going to do, assuming that the board is moving forward tonight with the public hearing, et cetera. So what you see then, if we just look at these boxes that are here, we'll get to this orange box in just a second. This is showing you issuing about $19.5 million of new bond principal. This is being stretched over a 20-year period of time, which it's not the limit. You can actually go longer than 20 years, but I don't personally believe that most school boards should do that. Of course, we would restructure it that way if you told us to do that. But because general obligation bonds that are voted and are paid from property taxes, they have a legal limit of no more than 20 years. To me, it just seems reasonable that you would limit yourself to no more than 20 with sales tax as well. Although technically, legally, this last payment could go all the way out to 2050 because the sales tax does not end now until January 1 of 2051. But this is assuming a 20-year repayment, issuing about $19.5 million. Now these boxes over here assume that you needed to set aside a reserve fund. Now we're hoping that you will not have to do that. Again, we'll talk about that in a second. But this is kind of the worst case scenario. What if you did? What if we had to go out than do a conventional public sale of these bonds where we ask big brokerage firms and big banks all across the country to bid on the purchase of them. And we may have to do that, but initially we're going to try not to do that. If you do have to do that, almost certainly you'd have to set aside this reserve fund. And that's one negative to having that kind of a sale, the conventional sale, is that you have to set aside the reserve fund, because these big bidders, they're not your local bank. They're not a bank that's around your community. They don't know you. They don't even know sometimes where Algona, Iowa is. They're just buying bonds because they know how the security works, and they're just buying them, but they're going to require a reserve fund. So in this scenario, you'd be setting aside almost $1.5 million. It is your money. You don't lose it, but you lose access to it, and you lose access to it for 20 years because it would be put into a lockbox, into this kind of special bank account, and you couldn't touch that $1.4 million until the bonds were completely paid off, whenever that might be, the 20th year or maybe sometime before that. And then, of course, paying bonding costs, most importantly, this underwriting cost. That is a fee, and that's just an estimate. It may be higher, or may be lower than that, but that would be the fee that whoever buys the bonds charges. The big brokerage firm that's bidding, et cetera, they would charge what's called an underwriting cost or an underwriting discount. That's a fee, basically. You can eliminate that fee if we can do a private placement. Again, just a second, we'll talk about that. Paying off the existing bonds. So this was just trying to say, what could you get to spend maybe $10.5 million from this scenario? But you can look down here in this kind of orange box. This is what we're actually proceeding with currently. We're trying to do this without going down that path of the conventional sale. That's exactly what the board did 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, when you issued the bonds that you currently have. Your local bank just bought the bonds. They agreed just through a fairly simple negotiation process to the interest rate and the structure and all that good stuff. We think that that's going to be possible again. If it is, then you can see there would be no debt reserve fund and there would be no underwriting costs. So those two things alone are adding a little bit over 1.7, almost $1.8 million in spendable money. So the same exact borrowing, but you now have $12.4 million to spend, mostly coming from that reserve fund that you would have gotten back, but you wouldn't get it back for a long time. So it doesn't help you build something or renovate or improve something today. Now, we've spoken with your local bank. They are interested in this. They would have to, because of the size of it, they would have to partner with one or more of their other friends or competitors, in the area. They would, do that. They would bring that other bank or banks together. So I believe that's going to be possible. We're really waiting for the hearing process to unfold, and then we'll be sending a packet to the banks that has the more official details rather than just me talking to them. And then it'll be at that time that they can, make a proposal. The key to the proposal, anytime we do that, is the interest rate, of course. I know, yes, they may buy the bonds, but are they going to assign 10% interest? If that's what they do, which I'm exaggerating just to prove a point here, but if that's what they were to do, that's not going to work because that's a ridiculously high interest rate and it's just not feasible, it's not reasonable. But they would assign a lower rate. Now, are they going to assign exactly what we think the market should be? Not necessarily. The bank will determine that rate, and then we at Piper will help you, the board, decide if that rate is reasonable. Because you're eliminating these fees in that scenario, technically the rate that they assign could be a little bit higher than what you might otherwise get, but not a lot higher. We have to do the math and determine what works best. So that process has actually sort of begun, but will officially really begin in the next week or so once you start the hearing process here. So we'll be sending that document to the bank. They'll talk with their friends, et cetera, and get back with us. If for some reason they come back right away and say, hey, the economy's changed, our business plan has changed, we just can't do this. That's okay, that's up to them. Then we would pivot and we would go that route where you'd have to have this reserve fund, et cetera. Or if we go through the entire process and they end up giving us a proposal, but the proposal, has 10% interest rate on it, then we're also gonna have you reject that, and we would pivot and go down that other path too. But because you have, to some degree, the luxury of time, you don't need this money immediately, so there is a little bit of time to take some time to go through this process first. We think it's worth your time to do that, because if you can have success with the private placement, it's gonna be much more beneficial to the district. And, it's also helping your local bank too, so everybody can kind of win. It's a win-win situation. This would be borrowing down to that 1.2 number. Now, this assumes an interest rate, which, again, we don't dictate what the rate is. The rate today would be probably in this range, 4.5, maybe slightly lower than that, but pretty close to that range. If you could issue general obligation bonds, just to give you an idea, so that would be a voted bond that requires property taxes, which is not what you're doing, but if you could do that today, a 20-year borrowing would be somewhere probably around 3.8-ish. You do pay higher interest rates than a sales tax bonds because it's not backed by property taxes, so we would expect that would happen. Any questions about that before I go to this section, I guess, to show you that it's theoretically at least affordable for you to do this? Just any questions about the structure that you see here, or anything that I just discussed?
Couple questions.
A couple of questions here, Matt.
What's our current interest
Okay.
rate?
Our current interest rate is 1%.
Let me look, is that right? I
think
have
so.
it over here, just a second.
And he's saying, and I think there's 4.5 up there, and Matt just said 3.8 somewhere in.
Yeah, this
Ballpark.
assumption is built on 4.5. He thought maybe slightly better if you went to a general obligation. It would probably be on 3.8-ish for 20 years currently. So the difference for sure.
Right, that is correct, and the 1% is correct. That's what the bank assigned them as Iowa State Bank, which is the same bank, of course, that we're initially talking to, at least here in this process.
And like you said, Matt, they determined that it could be higher. When they gave us 1%, that was certainly lower than the market as well, right?
That was significantly below the market, yes. So I'm not suggesting that because they did you sort of a favor then, you do them a favor now. That's not it at all, because we don't work for the bank. We're trying to do the best thing for the school district. But you're correct. They did assign incredibly low interest rate, and they did it like 5 months ahead of time. So it had really benefited the district for sure over the last two years or so as that debt's been outstanding.
In this procedure or in this timeline, if we don't get the local placement of the funds from the local banks, can we decide not to do the project still, obviously, if we have to go out and, okay.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. You can hold the hearing, which you're scheduling it, hold the hearing tonight. You can do all that. We can go through this process. If you get terrible proposal from the bank or no proposal from the bank, you haven't spent any cost, because we're not going to charge you anything. Of course, you've spent a little bit for the newspaper because you've got to publish notice of the news of the hearing, which that's not a big deal. I can't speak for your attorney. I can't tell you that they wouldn't charge you anything, but I don't think they would. Or if they did, it'd be very minor. Yeah, you could completely reject everything and just stop the process and not move forward at all. Not do it ever, wait a year, wait 3 years, or pivot, like I said, and go down that other path immediately or a few months from now or whenever it's needed.
Are these bonds tax exempt for the local banks?
Yeah, that is correct. They would be tax exempt, federally tax exempt. They would not be what we call bank qualified, which does not impact any of you that are individuals that might buy a bond like this, but it is important to the bank. But the bank understands that this would be not bank qualified. So that's also another reason why the 4.5% interest rate is being used here. If they were bank qualified, then it would be less than $10 million. You can only issue $10 million total in debt in a calendar year in that scenario. And then the rate might be just a little bit lower, not a lot, but 15 basis points to 25 basis points or something like that.
Is there any feasibility to not restructure it?
Go up to the sheet before that one, Matt. This is where, we don't restructure. We would have available, what is it?
9.92.
9 million.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
could still do this scenario, and if you had to do the conventional, you just take the 1.8 out.
Yeah.
So you'd have, 8.8-ish, 8.7 million if you had to go the conventional way. You'd still have, if you could do it the direct way, you wouldn't have this reserve fund and the underwriting costs. So you could still have, a little close to 10 million, even if you did go that way. This isn't accurate down here. I did not update this little section, so ignore that for now.
So, I just wanna make sure I understand, Matt, so we have $10 million without a restructure,
Yeah, that's correct.
okay.
If the private placement method can be successful. So that number, just to make sure, I think you guys get it, but let me get my little calculator out. I'm gonna take this 10.5, because that's what I just have kind of fixed in that position. You'd be shorting yourself the 1.8 million, but then you'd also get back the 992 and the underwriting 188. Yeah, so that'd be just about 9.8 million. So if the project cost is, or if you can keep it to, 9.8-ish or less, then we don't need to restructure that debt. However, I would say also though, note that, the payments are gonna be still quite high for at least for 6 or 7 years, but then they would drop back to being lower too.
Right, I'm just looking at total debt obligation over the course of that. It is there's chunk change there.
Well, 3431.
On the third page, which we haven't got to yet, but I'll just point something out that I know Lisa and I look at a lot. Yeah, this page right here, this yellow box, this column is, with this proposal, what they estimate our excess cash on hand is. Being, as you look through this, the lowest it would ever be is what it is right now. And I think that's a pretty good understanding of how affordable this is for the district. Our excess cash on hand only goes up from this point forward. And if you think about our long-term facility plans and you went ahead 5 to 7 years, which we've used that for, a possible elementary, for example, we're looking at somewhere around $5 to $6 million of cash, 4 to 5, somewhere in there, available to work with a possible general obligation, which is something that we've talked to, is pairing those two together. So just putting a lot of what we've talked about into one frame with some of those things. I'll let Matt explain this page that he has.
Yeah, and before I go back to explain all of this worksheet, just on that note there, Joe, let's say that you did this, and then, as Joe just suggested, 5 years from now, you come to phase 2 or whatever you're calling it. And so you might have, close to $5 million accumulated. You will also be able to borrow from sales tax again. It's not that you'll never be able to, you just can't borrow again from sales tax for a few years until you grow out of that 1.2 number. So in other words, let's say that this was exactly accurate. This is the real result. If that's true, this 1.2 next year, the revenue per student statewide, although we can't guarantee that it's going to go up, it generally does go up every year. And unless your enrollment drops by large numbers, you're going to get more than 1.7 million next year, and more the next year, and the next year, et cetera. That's just what the history of it has been. So this number will grow to 1.9 to 2 million to 2 million 1 or whatever. And as this number grows, this number doesn't grow because this number becomes fixed. So all of a sudden, this 1.2 coverage has grown to 1.3 to 1.4, maybe to 1.5. And if you needed to, you could go back out and borrow again and borrow back down to this 1.2 number. And even if that wasn't possible, because the math just didn't work, then you could fund the rest of phase two with the general obligation bond, if you could get voter support for that. But you could maybe have 5-ish million plus perhaps a couple million from the sales tax borrowing. And both of those could be added together to decrease the amount that you might need to ask property owners to pay for with the general obligation bond. So what you see on this worksheet, and this worksheet goes, you can see up here 5 pages, it's going out literally 30 years into the future. So it's very, very similar to a checkbook. It just has bigger numbers than at least my checkbook does, and I assume probably most of your checkbooks, but the concept is the same. So you had $1.8 million literally in cash between PEPAL and sales tax. So this worksheet has both of those funds combined. You had that much money in the bank in January. So that becomes the starting point. And from that point forward, we start to add future sales tax revenue. That's what this blue-ish number is here. Of course, it's estimated, and it's based off of enrollment and sales tax revenue statewide. So it's not going to be exactly 100% accurate, but hopefully it's reasonably accurate and maybe hopefully even a little bit conservative. Your voted PEPAL money is shown here. That's this $370,000, and it keeps growing because we make a slight assumption that your property values continue to grow, which usually they do. You can see that in this particular worksheet, if you go out to the third page of it, in 2033, that voted PEPAL revenue stops. Now, it may stop, it may not stop. Currently, it's going to stop because that's when your voter-approved voted PEPAL would expire. So you would have to renew it again by voting, and I did not make the assumption that that had happened, but it certainly would be up to the board and up to the community. But just know that this does assume that basically $850,000 a year of revenue drops off in 2033, and then your board PEPAL just continues to go forward because really every school district does levy that pretty much. So that's all revenue coming in, and then you're taking money out to make the payments on this hypothetical new this year. And the squiggly line is showing going from the old bond to the new bond. And then you also are spending just for other stuff. You're buying school buses, you're leasing school buses, you're buying computers, you're leasing computers, you're fixing carpet, replacing, tuck pointing, replacing glass and cement, all of that kind of stuff. There's a reserved $1 million every single year to do that, plus inflation on that, assuming that those things get a little bit more expensive. There is the assumption here that the new donor monies of $900,000 continues to come in. You have gotten a few of those payments, but that is assumed that that person or persons do not renege on that, so those monies are a credit. And then you see this balance. So as Joe said, if you look in this top right corner, this is just looking and seeking, if you know this is an Excel worksheet, for those of you that know what Excel is. So it's just seeking in that far column to say, what's the lowest point over the next 30 years? Again, it's not perfect, it's not 100% accurate, but it's reasonably accurate. And it's suggesting that even if you did this, even if you borrowed this $19 million and replaced the old bond and did a new $10 to $11 million project, and you spend $1 million every year, and you got the next couple more turf payments, you would never have less money than you had in the bank in January. Now, are you really never going to have less money? No, because in some of these years you're going to go out and spend some of that money. You're going to spend more than $1 million in some years because you have other needs, you have other projects. So you may spend, when you get out here to next year, in the summer of 2024, you may go out and spend $1 million extra or $2 million extra because you could. At least it certainly seems like you could. So that might draw the balance down, but you'd be doing that, of course, with your eyes wide open, knowing that that's what your intention would be. And then if you follow this all the way to the last page, which is the 8th page in this PDF document, at least the 5th page of the packet, again, this is all hypothetical, but it's hopefully reasonable. This is suggesting that even if you let your voted PEPAL go away, even if you borrow and fund this $10 to $11 million project this year, even if you continue to spend $1 million every year on stuff, you still may have upwards of an extra $15 to $16 million that you could be spending, not all at once, but here and there over the next 30 years, which may be another borrowing and repayment to that, and maybe just spending cash, every few years to do some other projects or what have you. So if you look at this worksheet and you understand it and you think that the inputs here are, reasonable, making sense, then this would suggest, although I'm not saying that you should do this project because I don't live in your community and I don't know what you need and what you don't need, that's not my business. But if you think that the project is needed and valuable, what this worksheet is showing you is that it certainly appears that you can relatively easily afford to make the payments and still fund the other needs that you have from your extra sales tax, because remember, you're not borrowing dollar for dollar, and your voted PEPAL and your board PEPAL. Does that make sense to everybody there?
It does, maybe I missed it though, and you mentioned it, Matt, was phase 2. So, has that been taken into consideration at all, Joe, in terms of 6-7 years down the road?
No, not in this worksheet.
That we have to.
Because we would need a general obligation for that, so we would have to go to our community, go to our voters, which is, we rewind a little bit to March of this year when we had a work session on facilities. We talked about, an elementary can't be funded with saved dollars. We can't generate enough. On this entire worksheet that Matt has, we'd never be able to generate enough to produce that, although general obligation, we could. And if you pair that with existing dollars like some PEPAL dollars and existing cash and even future saved dollars, then it becomes a relatively reasonable number to ask your public for.
Yeah, a couple, I know you don't want this to drag out forever, but just a couple notes that I'm thinking of as you said those things, Joe. One, I think for most schools, when you can do a significant project like this that you're proposing to do now and do it without impacting people's property taxes, at least to me, it certainly seems like your community would be at least a little bit more in favor later of perhaps passing a general obligation bond that does require property taxes when they can see that the board was being prudent, building this new, $10 to $11 million thing without impacting taxes, and they can see the value of it and how it helps the community, etc. So I think politically, that can be very beneficial to you to do this first, funding it with sales tax, and then if phase 2 truly does happen, then you could, do that with the general obligation bond. Now, on the timing of the general obligation bond, I know it seems like, gosh, phase 2, that's a long ways in the future, and it's not something that you need to think about right now. But I'm going to tell you, I think you do need to start thinking about it right now. Because the election laws changed, the legislature and the governor changed the election laws this past legislative session, so you can now only have a general obligation bond election and also an election to issue sales tax bonds if you were to get petitioned in the process that you're going through right now. You probably wouldn't be. Most schools don't get petitioned, but occasionally if you have, you can only have those types of elections one time a year in November. So if you think that phase 2 is, let's say, 5 years into the future, well, you don't really have 5 years to plan that, because you're going to want to have an election at least a year before that, and maybe 2 years before that, to give yourselves the luxury of extra time in case the general obligation bond election were to not pass, because it takes 60% approval, so that you can have another opportunity and bring that question back before the voters before you really needed or thought you were going to begin that project. And because you can only have the election once a year, you're going to have to begin that process of the petition, which is a different kind of petition than what could happen with sales tax, the petition and the education in the community, etc. I would say at least 3 years from now, if not sooner than that.
And I think it's important to talk about here, it's important to talk about in our community. In the last 13 years, the district has built a new middle school, the Gateway. We've had some generous gifts that have also allowed us to build a performing arts center, and all of that building has been done without tax dollars, property tax dollars. 0 property tax dollars have ever been used in any of those projects. And the district's done a very good job of committing themselves to being conservative with their community.
Yeah, the board, I mean, just as an outsider, I can tell you, and I'm not trying to brown nose you or the board, this is a fact. I mean, we work with about 90% of the schools in the state, so I see everything that's going on. Your school board and your prior administration, for better or worse, whatever you may think of them, for lots of different reasons that, you know, people look to their school and school officials, etc. They've been extremely prudent with that sales tax money. They've done amazing things with that money without having to ask property owners to pay up. And that is not happening in all the schools around the state. So that's something that you can be proud of if you've been a board member through that process, or you can, you know, look to those board members in the past and thank them for being good stewards of that money. So on this page now, I think you can see, yep, I can see it back up there behind Joe, the timeline, which I know you also have a copy of. So this is presuming that tonight you are holding the public hearing. I assume that will happen shortly after I drop off here. You're having it for a larger amount than we expect. That's just to cover all expectations, just in case you had to borrow more money for whatever reason, good, bad, or ugly. You typically always have the hearing for a larger amount, just to cover it. So that's the public hearing. So you're going to have that hearing, open it, take any comments if there are any, close the hearing. But then you're not done, because then tomorrow begins this 14-day waiting period. From July 11th through July 24th, it's just kind of a quiet period where we hope presume nothing's happening. But that's the period when a group of citizens, and it would take a significant group, it's not just a handful, could potentially petition the board. If you do not get petitioned through the close of business on July 24th, then you can move forward. You don't have to move forward along this timeline, although we assume, at least as of now, that you are, but you could change that if you wanted to. You could issue the bonds anytime after July 24th, but not before July 24th. So you can see then, once we know that you've not been petitioned, then we would start later this fall, because we don't need to act right away. You don't need the money right away, even taking this extra step of trying to do it with the bank. This fall we would start to actually circulate that bid package to the bank or banks. We would ask them to bid on November 13th, as they did before 2 years ago. They may bid right away. They may tell us within a few hours, within a couple days, but they would have to tell us by November 13th. So on that day is when we would know, do you have a reasonable proposal or don't you? If you do, you just go through the process, awarding it to the winner, whether it's, the bank there now going or someone else, whoever it could be. And if you don't get a proposal, that's what this little note here is just saying. It's saying if the private placement method doesn't work, then we pivot and go the other route. And we have plenty of time to do that between November and next spring, when you really need the money, because that's when you're going to begin to spend money in earnest. But if this process does work correctly, then on the 28th, that's when you would just pass some more legal documents that are required in any of these bonding processes. And December 14th, the transaction would close, and you would have the money literally sitting in the bank. You'd start earning interest on it. And the good news is that at least today, interest rates are higher. That sucks when you have to borrow money, but you can actually earn probably pretty close to what you're paying on the bonds if things are similar to where they are today. If you put this money in the bank today, you could almost certainly get above 4% on it, just sitting idle while you wait for the construction to happen month by month by month, etc. Now, are you going to earn that much over the next 2 years or 3 years? We don't know. None of us have a crystal ball to know that. But the good news is that at least in the current environment, there wouldn't be really what we call negative arbitrage, where you're paying more on the bonds than you're earning. It would probably be fairly close to a wash during the construction period at least. So any questions about the hearing process or overall questions that you thought of in the last few minutes?
I think we're good. Thank you, Matt, very much for all of this. And we're going to pair this with looking at some of our architects' work that they've done, and they'll be in to talk to the board in August and kind of put all this together. But
Yeah, so I guess just real quick to end this, I know one of your board members asked, what could you get without taking the old bonds out? If you find over the next couple of months that you don't need to do that because 9 million is enough, or 9.5 million is enough, or whatever, just let us know that. That's great, and then we don't have to restructure that old bond because we're not going to really do anything more until October from this point on, and we can make all kinds of adjustments to the amount, the structure, the timing, as and if you tell me something over the next few months.
okay.
All right?
All right, very good.
Okay, thank you guys. Have a good night. If you do have other questions, just let Joe know and he can pass those on to me and we'll get your questions answered. So have a good night. Thank you.
All right. We'll continue to move on then, and since we've already approved the agenda, I went ahead. We'll move into consent items next. And you should have received them in your board packet, and if there's any questions or if there's any, Joe, do you have any updates or anything?
Everything looks typical. Lisa's working to close up our FY 23 and head into FY 24. There's a little bit more to that this year as she's working in Laverne books and Algona books. But she's done a good job of that. You'll see there is a Laverne report in the consent items. So you can go through and see those. We still have those accounts separate, and we will, a few months for sure, as their bills kind of close up before we start to talk about moving those dollars or where we'll move them to.
All right, any further questions?
I make a motion to approve the consent item.
Thanks, Andrea. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Ann. Planning. We have a motion and a second then. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent items approved. We'll continue moving then into our superintendent's report.
Start by just kind of a summer sports recap. Our high school softball team ended the regular season with a 9-13 record, 6-8 in the conference. They opened up postseason play last Thursday at Humboldt and came up on the wrong side of a high-scoring game, but really competed hard all year long. Our high school baseball team ended up the regular season with a 15-14 record and 9-5 in the North and Central Conference. They won their first round game Friday at Clear Lake, and they're playing their second game tonight. I think it's been postponed till 3 o'clock tomorrow, but they're up 4-0 in that game to start. So both groups really represented the high school well throughout the summer. Staffing, we have 2 teaching positions that are not filled, and we do not anticipate filling those before the start of the school year. We do have plans in place that are good plans, solid plans that are good for kids. High school English course, where we're taking some of our electives and we're moving those to college classes. So everything is available to our kids as they were, just available in a different format from different staff. In the elementary, we have 6th grade ELA, which we're going to do some team teaching in that process, using one of our teacher apprentices for this school year. Kind of a Tura update. First thing with the field house, kind of reminding ourselves of the objectives of the project. That we have around 70 middle school girls who attempt to practice volleyball in one gym every fall. We have 8 basketball teams that compete during the same time of the year, where we have 2 full-size courts in the district. Needing more court space is the one objective that we're trying to gain with the field house. Second, provide more wrestling areas. With the addition of middle school girls and high school girls wrestling, we lack practice space. We often practiced on the Pouring Arts Center stage last year for one of our places, and we need more areas to practice. Larger weight room. Our current weight room is not capable of housing in entire sports teams, you know, to have your varsity football team or your varsity basketball team in there. It's not big enough to do that. And then the fourth objective is just track opportunities. Northern Iowa limits track opportunities for kids. It always has. That's not new. But there's opportunities that are now being opened in other areas. And if we could create an environment for our kids to practice, would be very valuable to us. So those are the 4 objectives. With those objectives in mind and working with our people, this is the current concept that Atura is working on. The yellow areas are new areas, so this would be the new field house east of the high school, where the old softball field. There's 4 full-sized wood courts in the center. There's 2 more courts on the outside, which would be on the track surface. This is a 200-meter track in here, 4 lanes around here, and then 6 on the straightaway. Over here is an 80 by 80 wrestling room where you could fit almost 4 full mats. You could actually fit 4 full mats in it, but in working with our wrestling coaches, having 10 feet here to come in, put on shoes, do those things would be valuable, so they've slid that over. This is the weight room, not necessarily the design of what would be inside, but where it would be located and what could fit in there. This entrance, there's actually 2 entrances. This would be the main entrance. This hallway right here, that's 4 feet above this field house floor. So there's steps going down here, here, and here, and then a ramp going down there. Hallways, that goes to the middle school. On this side, this would be a training room. We would repurpose then these areas, repurpose the larger of the wrestling room to the middle school media center. This would be an addition of a classroom / team room. It would have kind of theater type seats where we could have our health class. We don't have a place for health class in the high school right now, and really just an additional classroom space, which is always valuable to us. And we would need to keep 1 wrestling room. We would make this our middle school wrestling room, so we could still have multiple practices going on at once. Storage up here in the northwest corner. This, as it is about 67,000 square feet. They would have to dive deeper into a cost estimate, but right now they would do a rough cost estimate of about $12.5 million. Next month, Atura will be here, and they'll give you a fly-through. If you remember when we did the gateway, so they'll take you through that process. So you won't see it like this. You'll see it as you're walking into it from the ground level. You'll see it elevation-wise, what it looks like from our current fields as you walk through it, which I think is really valuable for us to get an image of what this could look like.
Anybody got it?
I was curious, Joe, because with the last schematics that we saw, there was some discussion around the material used to build. Is that kind of what we had talked about, like
This would be a steel building.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. This would be a steel building. Yeah. Concept-wise, to kind of match the color schemes that we have on our gateway and some of those. That's what you would start to get a good image of what they'll bring into us next month.
All right, any other comments or questions? Anything else, Joe?
Last thing,
board retreat, yes.
Board retreat. I'm hoping to finalize a board retreat for the week of August 7th. I think the 9th or 10th, which is Wednesday or Thursday, seem to be where it fits the best. That would also be corresponding to last year, 5 to 7-ish, got a question mark on that. Some topics that have been previously discussed for that retreat, facility planning. We'll continue to talk about this as well as our future planning and where we want to head toward, future school schedules, Assessment data instructional framework, Mrs. Eishin would be in to talk about some things we're doing instructionally for this year and some of our emphasis in doing that. And then an early retirement program and our thoughts on that in the future. And we certainly can add to that. Those are just some things that have been brought up so far. So I don't think we need to decide anything today, but I'll send something out this week to see 9th or 10th if that works. We can do that.
Do you respond when you get it, because I know we need to make a decision, get it on our calendars, so.
Did you say 8th, 10th, or 10th?
8th, 9th, or 10th. It looks like 9th or 10th, probably, which is Wednesday, Thursday.
Yeah, and I can't do
Okay.
What's it
It
look
looks
like
like the
today?
9th is pretty good.
that. What do we think about tonight? That would be fine. I'll let my calendar open for those few days anyway, just so we can decide a date. All right, thanks, Joe. All right, we'll start moving in then to our new business. We start with appointing a legal counsel.
Yeah, we'll do one appointee, and then we'll move to item B, and then we can work on our appointees together. But the first appointment in our legal counsel, I recommend appointing Steve Avery as our legal counsel for the 2023-2024 school year. This is an appointment that is done every year. Mr. Avery has been the school district's legal counsel for some time. I've worked closely with him in the last 2 years, and he's helped us. We also use Ehlers and Cooney, for example. They would be our representation on the bond sale, which they're experts in those fields, in some of those areas. But I do recommend the approval of Mr. Avery as our legal counsel for the 23-24 school year.
We need a motion then.
Make a motion to approve Steve Avery as legal counsel for fiscal year 2024.
All right, thank you, Tom. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Jay. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none then, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Steve Avery's appointed. We're gonna go in now to adopting the resolution supporting what we've kind of been talking about.
What we've been talking about, what Matt was talking about, this would be the next step. And again, adopting this resolution does not lock us into anything. It just allows us to move forward if we choose. But this resolution supports the proposed issuance of approximately $20 million. He explained that. That's just to make sure it's high enough. The project it's not a $20 million project. That would be the project plus the use of restructuring current debt, if that's what we needed to do. That gives us that ceiling of $20 million, using saved sales tax dollars to do that. So I do recommend the resolution supporting the use of saved dollars for the field house project.
Okay. All right, we need any discussion? If not, we need a motion on
I'll make a motion to approve
that. Resolution.
the resolution.
Supporting the use of our savings dollars. Okay, thank you, Andrea. Thanks, Lanny. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, hearing none, all in favor say, do a roll call on that since it's a resolution. Just came to me too. Thank you, go right ahead.
Davis.
Yes.
Limbo.
Yes.
Mitchell. Yes. Nugent.
Yes.
Benzie.
Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, and that, as Joe discussed, our next appointees, C through I, we'll discuss each one and then we'll approve them together, so.
Our equity coordinator, letter C, these are all annual appointments that we have every year. I recommend we appoint James Roeder as our equity coordinator for the 23-24 school year. Mr. Roeder has served as that role in the past. Letter D, our level 1 child abuse investigator, again, an annual appointment. I recommend myself for this position. I have also served as the child abuse investigator at level 1 in the past years. Letter E, our level 2 child abuse investigator, done annually. I recommend we again appoint the Algona Police Department as the level 2 child abuse investigators, as they have done before. F, harassment investigator. I recommend myself again for this appointment. This is an appointment I've held in previous years as well. Our 504-ADA coordinator, again, another another annual appointment. I recommend myself and all 4 building principals, Jared Cecil, James Roeder, Jill Schucher, and Brad Sudol, for this appointment for the 23-24 school year. This appointment was held by all the principals and myself this past year also. H, the Affirmative Action Coordinator, another annual appointment. Again, I would recommend myself for this appointment as a position I have held in previous years. And letter I, the Homeless Coordinator. I recommend we appoint Jill Schucher as the Homeless Coordinator for the 23-24 school year. Mrs. Schucher has held this appointment in the past and has gone through the required training for this position.
And any other required training people do, I assume?
Yep.
All the court
Yep.
things.
Make a motion to approve all appointees.
All right.
Second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. All right, we're looking at the first reading policies of legislative changes.
And I have the papers for you, and it's lengthy, so I kind of want to explain what's on the papers as we go through it. These are all policies that have been updated following the 2023 Iowa General Assembly. Some of the highlighted topics, this is not an all-inclusive, but includes some legal changes to employee professional development, student graduation requirements, student gender, identity, and pronoun use, and instructional library materials, as well as some other things that we will go through. On your paper, anything that's green is an addition, and anything that's red is being removed. The first policy is 104, the anti-bullying and anti-harassment policy. This is really simply just a rewrite. There's not a lot different other than our policy did not match the recommended IASB policy. So it's an entire rewrite. Some of the things that are different, complaints have to be reviewed in a timely manner. They get specific with 24 hours. The definition of what is bullying is the same. Something else that is added, prohibited, that is specifically in the policy, which it wasn't before. Moving on, the red is what ours formerly was. You'll see there's no retaliation piece to that, so it's just aligning with the IASB recommendation, which is what we do in all of these. 104R1, which is the anti-bullying and anti-harassment investigation procedure. It's specific. The investigation procedures are specific. We did have procedures before. There's just probably a little more to it. You'll have a link on your website. You have an alternate investigator. It goes through the investigation specifics that must be done and not limited to these things. And then a decision when that has to be made. So again, not a lot of changes, just a rewrite to match the recommended policy. 213, public participation in board meetings. This is also a rewrite to reflect the recommendations of the Iowa Association of School Board. The rewrite does match our current practice of what we do. The board, we recognize the importance of citizen participation. We have a public comment period. Citizens just have to let us know prior to the meeting. That's one change from our policy, is we were specific to say you had to let us know 5 days previous. This just says we have to be notified prior to the meeting. It does have 5 minutes of total allotted time, which is what we've allowed in the past as well, but it specifically says that now. Matt mentioned petitions. This says that we would allow petitions to be placed as a topic on the agenda. We would have done that. That was current practice already. It's just now board policy. Yeah, we can determine that of how many minutes total for the public participation. know if we didn't have anything in our other one. I think,
Yeah, we just kind of limited it to the
5 minutes per each
Five,
one.
yeah.
Per person.
per person.
Let's-
We
let's
didn't
do
limit the
that.
number of speakers.
402.2 is a child abuse reporting. No change was needed. Our policy already matched. There are some of those things that we have been through in the last year to 18 months. So there wasn't anything that needed to be changed. 402.5 required professional development for employees. The big change here is that when we have licensed employee professional development, we have to provide the employee notice indicating the section of the law or rules adopted by the state board that determines the requirement of that professional development. So when we provide PD, we have to cite law that exists of why we're giving that professional development, which all of our professional development is about, best practice and research-based practices, which would fall in alignment with the law. So that's really what I believe the intent is, so we don't have professional development that's not for the best practice of education. 50307, student disclosure of identity. To summarize that, if a student asked to be referred to as a gender different than their birth, then as a district we are required to inform the family. If a student makes a request to be called a name different than their gender, then we have to, or a pronoun, then we have to inform the parents. This is the form that you use. We let the parents know, that your child made this request or requested this accommodation. So it's just a transparency thing, letting parents know. This is a request to update the student identity, what their current name is, and then what they would like to be called. We have a board policy form to do that.
And that determination's based upon what the family's wishes are,
What the family's wishes are, correct?
not the school's wishes.
Correct. 505.4, testing programs. There was no changes needed for that. Our policy aligned with the recommendation. Same thing with graduation requirements, except after the second paragraph. Prior to graduation, the district will advise students on how to successfully complete free application for federal student aid. We have to add that. That was already a practice. Our counselors do an awesome job at that, but it has to be in your graduation requirements. 507.2E3, there's a new policy. I inserted that on the administration of medication for students, parental authorization and release for that. E4 would be the same thing. So just a way for parental release of administrative medication. 601.1 school calendar. This is a mandatory policy and it reflects the new Iowa law. This one sentence has to be added. Each year, the minimum school calendar may include up to 5 days or 30 hours of instruction delivered primarily over the internet. We do not have any of those hours or days in our calendar built. I would envision if we got to February and the extra hours we had were close to being used, we could make a decision as a district of the next snow day would be. That would be probably the place we could use that. I will say I'm hesitant to that for a number of reasons. I don't think every child in our district has the same access electronically. I don't think every child in our district or any district has the same opportunities in their home for learning. So that would be, we'd have to be at a serious place in our hours, our instruction to probably move in that direction.
And there was nothing in there about how many kids from the district.
No,
Does it say 30% or 100%? It's just 5 days?
or 30 hours, yeah.
Okay.
6055, this is a change in health education. Our policy did say everyone has to have health education, and included was that they had to learn about acquired immune deficiency syndrome. That has to be now taken out of that policy. 6051, I think we're getting to our last one. Instructional materials added to the end of paragraph 1. The superintendent will provide licensed employees the necessary training to ensure that the selected instructional materials comply with the applicable laws. All instructional materials are available to review upon request. We already had that policy. They're always available to review. All of our books in our library have been on our website from the beginning, and we welcome people to look at anything that they would choose to. That is all of our legislative updates.
Definitely a number of them.
You have
Yep.
a couple options here.
Yep.
I'll let you.
A couple options. We can leave that as a first reading tonight and take no action, or we can look at it as a first and second reading and take action for motion to have it approved. And move forward, or we can bring it back next month, basically.
Yep.
I just
So-
have one question. Was there something about library materials in the school?
We already had the library materials policy update that has a process. If someone questioned anything in our library, a laid out process, we already had that, so we didn't have to change that.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
I went through that a few months back.
Yep.
Approved that, if I remember correctly. So, what is the board's wishes? Would you like to move forward with first and second reading, or would we like to bring this back and look through it a little more?
I'd like to take extra time for my sake on
Okay.
5037 to see whether I'm supporting that policy or not. Just whether
Then I
I'm
say if we're
3%.
not, then let's take the time. We'll bring it back next month. It doesn't hurt for us to read through it again, and we'll gladly, it'll be the first reading then, no action taken tonight. We are then moving forward then with a second reading of the policies that you see in front of you right here, I believe.
Yes. So these are 800 series second reading, things that we've went through. The green is kind of a recap of 801.2. There's updated language to match the IASB recommendation. Overall meaning of that policy is the same. 8023 is a new to emergency repairs. The policy reflects Iowa law regarding emergency repairs. We did not have that policy previously, so we need to add that. 8031, disposing of obsolete equipment. We need to update the dollar amounts and the value of equipment for the process of disposing of obsolete equipment. Currently, we have the value of no more than 25 may be determined by the board, but requires a public hearing with 5,000 or more. Those two values should be the same, so we need to make those two the same rather than have those different. 8033, credit cards. This is a number change only. It's going to move to 4011. Am I right there, Lisa? Yeah. Our language is fine, we just have to change the number. 804.2, the warning system and emergency plan, changed to the district emergency operations plan, which we already have in place. We just need to update our policy in the new language. And then the last one is the asbestos containing material. We do not have this policy. This policy says that we will follow protocol to inspect and replace asbestos, which we do and have this summer, but we need it in policy.
On 8031, what are you guys suggesting we change those numbers to?
So they're both 25?
Yeah.
They're both 25.
All right. Any further discussion? All right, we then need a motion to approve the 800
And then-
series.
And before we do that,
You got
I'm
some
going to do the second
second
reading.
ones on these two?
Yeah,
Okay.
You can do those. These are
Okay.
ones that, we've already had the first reading, we had them in May. These are the second readings, so we went through these. The meeting notice, updated, that we must be placed prominently, and we already do that, but updated to align to that. Employee record regulation updates how long we keep those things, the credit and procurement cards. It's listed as 8033 update. Yep, just that number change. 4072 licensed employee contract release, clarifying language provided for guidance for the district for charging a reasonable cost to hire a replacement. So that is in policy if we wanted to do it. Non-resident students updated to clarify legal requirements for transfers. And then 6046, instruction at a post-secondary, the final paragraph's removed, so it does not apply to district will deny awarding high school credit. So we can, those are the second readings of all of those that you can do together.
I'll make the motion on the 800 series, second reading, or to accept those. And then the 210.5, 401.5, 401.0, 10, 407, 501.2, 6046.
Very good.
All right, thanks for listing those, Jay. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I will second that motion.
Thanks, Tom. We have motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Second readings are approved. All right, looking at setting what our legislative priorities will be, and I appreciate you, Joe, kind of giving us some suggestions on that as we move forward here.
In last week's memo, I sent you some of this information. The documents, it's in your packet. It's also linked on your agenda. That document contains the beliefs and the resolutions. It's organized that the beliefs are in pages 1 through 12 and the resolutions are on 13 through 21. 3 questions that we should ask ourselves. Number 1, are the issues in the platform, are there issues the platform doesn't currently address? So as we look through that, is there something in there that the Iowa Association of School Board is not doing for us that we want it to? The second question with the beliefs and resolutions, beliefs are long-standing items representing the association's values. They largely remain the same. Do we think they should be different, or are those okay as they are? And then the third thing is selecting priorities. Now, no more than 4. I listed 3 that I believe would positively impact the Algona Community School District. I think there's many that may, and that's what we need to do, is come up with our priorities to submit to the Iowa Association of School Boards. 3 that I listed would be teacher recruitment and licensure. It supports additional tools to attract individuals to the teaching profession, extending the Teach Iowa Scholar, extending the teacher intern program, also create program for student teaching grants and stipend to expand teacher apprenticeships. We have teacher apprenticeship in our district right now. Mrs. Eischen leads that for us, and we think it's a very valuable tool for preparing people to teach. But it doesn't come with any financial support. It's currently being funded from state ESSER dollars, which will go away. And then we wondered what happens to the program, because it's a good program, but being able to fund it would be important. The second thing is supplemental state aid. The school aid formula is the biggest driver in providing resources for education in our state, and keeping that at a level that allows us to provide a high quality education, I think, is important. And the third is mental health. We've put some things in place to support the mental health of our students that I think are working very, very well. We have 3 people who work full-time in our district, a mental health therapist and 2 youth service workers. But we fund that through ESSER and alternative sources, including some grants from the care team in town. The state stepping in to fund this would be valuable. It would be valuable and allow us to make sure we can keep these things long-term. So those are 3 things that would certainly positively impact, and there's others. And this would be an opportunity to talk about some others that you thought would be important for us.
I will pass something on. The ISB board spent many hours redoing legislative priorities. We thought we had not really touched them in about 3-4 years of any updates, upgrading. So we spent, I'm not sure how many hours over months, updating these to be what we think is current and beneficial to Iowa schools. So I think it's well done, and being very upfront, I will always support mental health and state aid for two critical areas for students in school districts. So always support those two.
And I think that teacher recruitment and licensure comes to the surface for me as we are headed into the third year in a row without having all of our teachers hired. And I don't see that getting better in the near future. I think there needs to be legislative changes that gets more people into the profession. That's the problem. We need more kids going to be teachers, whether that's an Iowa Scholar program or an intern program or paying them while they're student teaching, whatever it is to get more kids going to the profession is what we need.
Again, I thank you both for spending the time, especially Tom on the state board also, so and bringing these suggestions to us. I think they meet what our goals are here too, so I just need a motion unless there's any other comments.
I'm okay with the ones that Joe proposed. I think
Okay.
those would be valuable with their efforts spent on those three.
All right, so the motion, Jay?
Yeah,
All right. We do have a motion then to move forward with the three that we suggested. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Laney. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Approve an agreement with City for display of trophies.
Yep, this is an agreement with the city of Laverne to display state team trophies and state banners in their facilities. I would expect a similar agreement with the Corwith Community Club in the future. I know that's been proposed to them, and we'll hear back from them. But this first agreement is with the city of Laverne. Stuff that's in the school building, trophies, can be displayed in their community center and their places. Same, and we'll have that for some of the other communities as well.
It's good to, they're willing to keep all them and display them. So, all right, do we have a motion to approve the agreement with City of Laverne?
I'll make a motion to approve the agreement with the city of Laverne to display trophies.
Thank you, Tom. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Thanks, Laney. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Out-of-state football trip.
Coach Jacobson takes the senior football players each year on a leadership retreat to Lanesboro, Minnesota. They leave the afternoon of August 3rd and will return the night of August 4th. We need to approve this as an out-of-state trip. I certainly recommend this. It's great work that they do with the kids, and I recommend the leadership retreat out of state.
All right. Just need a motion then.
I'll motion to approve it.
Thanks, Jay. Do we have a second?
Second?
Thanks, Andrea. We have a motion and a second to approve the out-of-state football trip. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And I believe the stick document is what we're looking at to approve the Atura agreement.
Very long agreement. Atura is the architect who has worked with us. They worked on our Gateway project. They've also been working on the concepts for the field house. With approval, they'll be in the August board meeting to kind of take a deeper look so you guys can see more of the concept. They've done really outstanding work for us. So I do recommend the approval of Atura as our architect on the field house project.
And our legal counsel's okay with this?
They are.
Has reviewed
Yep,
it?
yep.
Okay.
All right. Then need a motion to approve this agreement.
I make a motion to approve the agreement with Atura.
Thanks, Tom. Do we have a second?
Yes, I'll second that.
All right, thanks, Jay. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion then? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move on to open enrollment.
We have 2 open enrollment applications that all meet the requirements for approval.
I make a motion to approve our open enrollments.
Thank you, Andrew. Do we have a second?
Seconded.
Thanks, Jay. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Couple last things under personnel. We'll start with approved contracts.
With 2 contracts, Amber Limbaugh, volunteer volleyball coach, and Cheyenne Studer, middle school girls basketball coach.
All right. Need a motion then for approval.
I make a motion to approve the new
Thanks, Andrea. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Thanks, Lanny. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Contracts approved. Move on to resignations.
2 resignations, Heidi Morris, Bertha Godfrey, Teacher Associate, and Michelle Stone, Bertha Godfrey, Teacher Associate. And we thank both of them for their service.
So these still looking to probably replace?
We do
Make the
have a
game?
couple, these, for sure, we need to
Yeah.
replace these, yes.
Okay. All right, need a motion then to approve the resignations.
So moved.
Thanks, Jay. Do we have a second?
Second vote?
All right.
Andrea.
Andrea then. All right. Any further discussion? All right, hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, just before we go, thank you everybody for your time. Thank you for always thinking about the mission and the vision as we make the decisions that we did tonight. And don't forget to think about that date. Sounds like August 9th or 8th is the
Yep.
Wednesday.
Get something sent out right away tomorrow. Check on
Please
that.
put that on your calendar so as we move forward. So then we need a motion for adjournment. Nobody wants to.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thanks, Lanny.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Jay. We are adjourned. Everybody, go out and hopefully you're not going to get rained on.